I've got a special guest in the studio today, Kip Winger, who has got multiple platinum albums and was nominated for a Grammy for a classical album that we talked about 10 years ago. Well, welcome back to Wisconsin Public Radio, Kip. Really nice to have you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to see you again.
Last time we talked, you had just released Conversations with Nijinsky, which, if I'm not mistaken, might have gone to number one on one of the classical charts. Is that right?
Yeah, it did. I was really lucky to have that go to number one on the traditional classical charts on Billboard. So that was a surprise. I mean, because I've always done this just because I love it. So things like that are icing on the cake.
Well, I it was deserved then, and we'll get talk about your new release in just a moment. But I just wanted to revisit your music career briefly. You cross genres, and many of us know you as the frontman and the bassist for your band Winger, and you spent some time with Alice Cooper, and you've been touring and playing for many, many years. When you were growing up, did you have exposure to classical music?
Yes, but it wasn't until I was a teenager. I started, my parents were in a jazz band, so music was always in the family. They brought home instruments when we were very young, and got my brother drums and my other brother guitar, and then the only thing left was a bass. But I wanted to play bass. I always make a joke out of that. And we all sang, and my mom would help us learn songs off the record player. And my mom had a great ear. My dad played bass, and she was a singer, jazz singer, and they had a little trio. And so, very musical family from the very beginning. And when I was about 16, I studied classical guitar with a guy named Sam Guarnacha, who was teaching at the University of Denver. Because and that's where I got the ear for Baroque music. And then started studying ballet when I was around that time. One of my girlfriends wanted to take it, and none of her friends would take it with her. So I said I would do it because I'd been studying karate before that, and I was all stretched out. And when I hit the ballet class, I was like duck to water. It was just like, wow, this is incredible. And mostly because like I was hearing all this music. I was like, oh my God, what's that? What's that? What's that? And one thing people don't realize is when they don't think about it so much, even the classical aficionados, Stravinsky and all those early pieces were ballets. There was so much great ballet music that's now considered concert music. They were all in the Ballet Russe with Diaghilev and all of that thing that was happening in Paris in the early 1900s. Afternoon of a Faun and all those, so many great, what are now concert pieces were ballets. And so that's really where I got hooked.
It was such an artistic flowering then too, with Picasso was doing sets and things for some of those ballets, and there was so
Right.
much there was poetry involved, and just this wonderful literary world and musical world, artistic world all coming together. Yeah.
I'm really into that epicenter of what was happening artistically. I was very, very lucky actually to have my ballet Ghosts with the San Francisco Ballet, choreographed by Christopher Wheeldon, performed in the the Chateau Theater in France, where they have a Chagall on the as the
Oh,
curtain,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it actually was where they did a lot of those performances.
Oh, wow. What an
Yeah,
experience. That's right.
yeah,
You did
proud of that.
Ghosts and the conversations with Nijinsky and well, last time we talked, you had been studying composition. You had been doing that pretty regularly. We talked about that was almost, it was like an apprenticeship, doing it the way it had been done for centuries, people studying composition, like with the guilds and things like that. Are you still studying composition, or do you feel like you've had your master classes and now uh, you're the composer? Well, you are a composer.
Yeah, thank you. I always look for somebody that I admire to take some lessons from. I just recently took two lessons from this composer who is at Princeton named Stephen Mackey. He's a guitar player. He's written a lot of like electric guitar concertos, but he's got a lot of concert music, and he's a great person. And I'll probably take a few more from him. I've been very busy just to get their take on two things. I like to seek out like a mentor. My whole life, I've always felt like having a mentor is a very important thing. And so I took two lessons from him, and I want to do that because I want them to tell me what they think of my music and what I could do better. Like, what am I missing here? Or what do you think is good about it? And then also do a deep dive into their scores and ask a lot of questions, because there's so many things in orchestral music. I mean, you could never do everything, but there are certain pockets of compositions that I really want to understand what the composer was thinking. And I'm a big fan of contemporary classical music, of living composers. And so, I mean, I just emailed him. I got his email from a friend of mine who knew him, and I just cold emailed these people. Hey, man, I'm this dude, and I want to learn something. Can you teach me? And so far, it's been a great way to go. But like I say, I grew up always seeking out mentors because when I was young, my dad gave me this book called Think and Grow Rich by a dude named Napoleon Hill. And the whole premise of the book is to shadow someone who's better than you at something if you really want to get good at something. Having said that, I'm a bit of a, I wish I'm jealous of people that went through the traditional music school path because I feel like that would have been a fun thing for me, but it just wasn't in my destiny. I was always touring with a rock band, and so I kind of took a different way.
That said, though, I saw a YouTube that you did that gave an example of a riff that would have been heard, in one of your rock songs, and then you showed what that riff sounds like in an orchestral way, up an octave with some winds and the bass, and it was just, I don't think that clip was more than a minute and a half, but it was so enlightening, and
Yeah.
it showed how your musicianship as a rock musician and your musicianship as a composer are both so strong, and it was fascinating.
No, thank you very much. I've been trying to figure out because I get asked that question a lot, like how do you put those two things together? And for me, it's just very natural. And so that I specifically did that post to try to like boil it down to the bare minimum, like check it out. And because in my music, in my orchestral music, two things. One, I've always tried to make a way in the orchestration to get the orchestra to really rock. There's a lot of orchestral music, thousands and thousands of pieces, but it actually is pretty hard to find something that really rocks. Of course, Beethoven's Fifth, okay, but other than the cliche stuff, it's hard to find the attitude that you might hear from a Led Zeppelin song. And so that's one thing I've tried to do, and sometimes more successfully than other times. And I forgot what number two is. I said two things, and I have no idea what I was going to say.
That's okay, but you've got two big pieces on this new release. I mean, major, a violin concerto and a symphony, those are big undertakings. They're meaty pieces, and I'm wondering, what was the impetus? We'll start with maybe the symphony. What was the impetus for that?
Yeah, so Giancarlo Guerrero, the conductor who was the conductor of Nashville Symphony for years, and they won multiple Grammys. It was like April of 2018 when
Huh.
when they were talking about commissioning me for two pieces, and um, I was having lunch with him, and he goes, "Come on, Kip, do you want to write? Why don't you write your first symphony?" You know, and I was just kind of mind blown. I hadn't even thought of that. I was always thinking in terms of a composer like John Adams, who doesn't write a symphony. He writes all these cool pieces with weird titles, and you know. And then I thought about it, and I thought, wow, that would be incredible to try to take that on. And they wanted two pieces. And what happened was the original concertmaster from Nashville Symphony, who was the person who actually asked me to write the violin concerto, his name is Jun Iwasaki. And that was a huge honor. And that was also terrifying because there's so many great violin concertos that have come before. It's like, what can I bring to this? But then I was thinking, I've spent my life in the studio with Reb Beach playing this virtuoso electric guitar, you know, and I've oftentimes worked out his solos with him. So I thought, okay, I think I can do this, you know. And then June left, and I was in a panic about who they were going to find, and then Peter Otto came into the picture, who is astounding musician. I was so lucky to get Peter to play this piece because it's a very difficult piece. I made a point not to put in all the bells and whistles like, ooh, they're going to do this with their hands and all these weird violin techniques, because there's so many violin concertos that do all of that. I wanted to do something where it was just what I wanted to hear the violin do, basically, and very lyrical and very melodic in a lot of ways. And so to answer your question, it's been since 2018 that this kind of took shape, and we recorded each piece 2 years apart because scheduling was somewhat of a problem, which was fine with me because I really took a lot of time to try to get it right. You know, you can rush something and put it out, or you can take your time and make it right, and the only thing anybody's going to remember is if it's good or not. You know, it's never like, oh, that only took you 3 months, or did it take you 10 years? Nobody cares about that. It's like, what's in the beat, you know,
Yeah.
where's the beat?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I can't wait to talk about the violin concerto. You did not go easy on Peter Otto, but oh my gosh, what a piece, what a result. But let's talk about the symphony first. What an interesting premise that a soul receives a message via Morse code, um, a message of atonement. And I got
Yeah.
to tell you, my dad was a ham radio operator, and I grew up with, I mean, just listening to Morse code constantly as a
Wow.
kid. I mean, so that was, something that was for me very much a communication thing. So, how did that come about?
I have no idea. I just had the idea one day that, I was going through a very difficult time when I started writing that, and I felt quite lost from myself. And when we feel lost from ourselves, you're searching, 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 and all this introspection. And and then it dawned on, and I felt, this sounds crazy, but I felt like I was being contacted from something. I don't know what, but I literally could see the shape of something that I was being contacted from, and I thought, what's going on here? And then it was like, whoa, what if your own lost soul was trying to reach you and using Morse code? And it was kind of a breakthrough in the idea, because I thought, okay, a person receives Morse code messages of atonement from his own lost soul, because I was kind of off the rails on a crazy train. And and when I and then I realized, oh my God, that would be really cool. And to be honest, I mean, my head exploded with the possibilities of using Morse code. And admittedly, I didn't really use it in. I used it very sparingly, let's put it that way. But because you could have done, okay, I'm going to do all this, like I'm going to do an essay in Morse code and put it in music. But I didn't want to do it like a Poindexter, overly cerebral piece of music for this. I wanted it to be very heartfelt because of my state of mind. So I chose four Morse code messages, words that I could use and recycle the rhythm of those words throughout the instruments in the orchestra. And so the first movement is SOS, the soul is going, we have an emergency here, which is it's a simple Morse code, which is dot 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 dot. But it lent itself so beautifully to moving that rhythm around the orchestra. And then I, kind of superimposed a melody over it and developed it from there. So it's SOS, Elios, which means mercy in Greek, and metamorphosis, which is going through the change, and then metatania, which is like a transformative change of heart. And so it ends where you have broken through this thing. And in the piece, I built what I call the brick wall chord. I did a post about this actually. It's a very, well, it's D, A, D, C sharp, F, B, F. It's transposed. I can't remember which version of it I put on my last post, but it's a very dissonant chord, and depending on how you voice it throughout the orchestra. And the idea is that, he keeps the protagonist of the story keeps coming up against the brick wall chord and not being able to break through to enlightenment. And finally, in the 186th bar of the piece, he breaks through, and I use this giant major chord with some major seconds and stuff to make it interesting. And I was very happy with that section of the piece, because I felt like I had that chord going through every movement. It wasn't just one movement. It was all the movements. I would place that in there as a pillar of structure. And finally, it was broken through. But, this was 2 or 3 years in the making. I was, running up against a wall, literally, for years, trying to figure out how to, bring that idea to the fruition.
And that last movement, I was struck by that beautiful modulation and the warmth of those chords towards the end there, but also the percussion. You have some great use of percussion there as things are opening up and breaking through.
Thank
It's,
you.
yeah, it's just a
Thank you for noticing that, because that's my favorite part of the whole piece, when it breaks through, and then it 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 settles down with a few notes, and then the solo violist comes in, and then or the flute, and then the solo violist have a little conversation there, and then it builds in this weird cyclical string thing. That what I'd like to say right here at this point is that the best ideas come by accident. I mean, I'm really convinced about that. Like, for any artist, I think if they were honest about it, they would say that all of their best ideas happened because they were trying to do something else. And then all of a sudden, it was revealed to them what the real idea was. It never comes from you trying to make it happen. It's better if you work every day, so the reflexes are, working and working and working. But certainly in my case, every best idea came by accident.
it's um it's a journey. There's a narrative arc to the symphony, and for me, it was reminiscent of some of the romantic and post-romantic and early contemporary composers that were influenced by poets and by literature and would tell that kind of story. I'm thinking even of Tchaikovsky, like the Manfred Symphony, and Schubert and the Wanderer. He's, searching for happiness, and for Tchaikovsky, he's got some feelings of guilt and things like that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
even Scriabin, his I think poem of ecstasy has this mystic chord. And I'm wondering, did do you connect with the romantics or the post romantics in any way? Did
Yes. I do. I do. I it's a battle in my consciousness always about how to be a modern composer, but also write things that are very emotional. And that's a very difficult thing to do, you know. And because I'm very hard on myself, I want to be in the group of modern composers that sound modern, you know. But I don't want to be. I'm not drawn to the stylistic where you're so far into the theory of it that you're losing all the emotional aspects to it, and it becomes this kind of cerebral exercise in composition. You know, there was, you know, this all developed from Schoenberg when he developed atonal music, and then they were trying. I understand why it happened because they were trying to push the language further, and there was nowhere else to go, you know, and so they pushed it further and further, and then the academics kind of sequestered themselves in the universities and kind of were looking down on people that didn't understand what they were trying to do, and they really did a lot of damage to the orchestral world at that in the period of time because they alienated themselves from common folk who want to hear something that sounds good, you know. And I can appreciate it because when I get into the theory of it and understand what that music can sound like and why it's cool, but so much of it is like you know to it would the metaphor I would use is a mathematician working on some very difficult you know equation and only the other professors being able to appreciate it because they can't, you know, it's not like 2 + 2 is 4. You know, so I've gone out of my way to learn all of those techniques and have them at my disposal, but frame it in a more of where I came from, which was pop music, and create this, you know, hybrid, legitimate, you know, classical music that can be very, very dissonant at times, but then will be very consonant and focus on the emotions of how I'm feeling when I'm writing it and trying to translate those emotions to whoever's listening.
Well, that second movement in the symphony, the Greek word translates to mercy, I think.
Yeah.
And boy, there was just some beautiful, beautiful string writing in that, and also the individual, you know, the flutes and the winds, and you just hear these things, and then it would travel around the orchestra.
Yeah.
It was just, and you talked about the emotion. It was full of emotion, full of heart.
Yeah.
That, yeah,
Yeah.
really lyrical.
Yeah. You know, the other thing I would add to this, and I just had this realization 3 days ago, is that for me, I'm very drawn to music where I can feel the pain in the music. You know, I need to feel a little bit of pain in the music that I listen to. I mean, I just do. I need the emotional connection to feel this human condition enough to draw me into it, you know. And that's how I compose, and that will always be where I'm coming from. Very, very difficult for me to write something devoid of any emotion or even happy. I'm not difficult to write happy music.
Well, you know, classical music right now is enjoying some real stability in the radio world anyway, at Wisconsin Public Radio, we've just expanded our offerings. We're offering live hosted classical music between 6 a.m. and 7 p.m. And then we've got, you know, a syndicated service on. So we're 24/7. And we're hearing people say that it provides a way to process tough times. These are tough times, and there's a certain news fatigue that's happening. And so, classical in particular allows this kind of depth of emotion, this depth and breadth of feeling. I mean, all music does to some degree, but I think classical has a few more tools in the toolbox and a larger palette to allow for, you know, it's that expression where words fail, music speaks, or something along those lines.
Completely agree, and that's the reason why I've continually gravitated further and further into it, and to where basically I've jumped off the other train. I've been winding my band down for the last 5 years. We only have a few gigs on the books, and I'm not really taking new gigs unless it sounds super fun, like a big festival or something like that. But yeah, because for me as a composer, being able to, having come from the other side, you know, where your tools are two guitars, bass and drums, and a synthesizer versus a whole orchestra, there's no comparison for me personally, and that's largely also because I've done everything I personally can do in that other world. There's no other song I could come up with. I've like, oh, well, I wrote one of those, and yeah, I wrote one of those, and I wrote one of those. Actually, I wrote 10 of those, 10 of those, 10 of those, and 10 of those. And I bought the T-shirt even, and now it's time to move on. you know, um,
Yeah.
um, so and I just am so inspired by the sounds, and I'm hearing a sound in my head that I haven't been able to find yet. It's getting better, but it's it's such a miracle to work with such an incredible art form that is beyond an explanation. It's you can define. I think Sondheim actually said that in an interview. You can define sculpture and you can define painting, but music is this just this thing that happens. It's a completely different language, and so as it's very exciting to work with music. It's also terrifying and very frustrating, but it's exhilarating, it and torture. So,
Well,
there's all these aspects to it, and I'm no different than anyone else. I'm thinking of all the biographies I've read of composers.
yeah.
Torture is definitely in there.
Yeah. Well, despite that process for you, the result has just been phenomenal. And I want to move to talking about the violin concerto that is on this new release too,
Thank you.
subtitled "In the Language of Flowers." And before we get into the actual piece itself, you mentioned that you started playing bass at home. Did you ever play string bass, acoustic bass?
My dad had one sitting in the house because he was in the jazz trio with my mom, and he played an upright bass, and I did play it, but I was never that drawn to it. He was pretty good. He showed me some stuff, and I always felt like, it didn't really, it's not my thing. And the older I've gotten more and more away of wanting to play an instrument at all, except for the piano. But to answer your question, I mean, I did dabble in it sometimes. I recorded a few things here and there with a upright bass, and it's a cool sound if you're doing the right kind of music. But it has to be in the right setting. And I never played with a bow or anything like that. I mean, that's a lifetime of study. But as the older I get, like I say, the further away I get from actually playing an instrument.
We talked a little bit about earlier about working with your violinist and creating this violin concerto. And boy, listening to this was a joy. And
Thank
the
you.
violinist that recorded it, Peter Otto, is stupendously talented. And you did not cut him any slack. Holy cow, Kip.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Well, it's funny because I've worked with Reb Beach my whole life, and Reb's a virtuoso electric guitar player. I mean, he's a freak of nature. I mean, he's so talented, and I've witnessed him so many times. Just the lightning striking down upon him, and he just connects with the universe and just does this phenomenal stuff. And then we'll work on his solos together. And I felt like if I'm going to write a violin concerto because of so many things that have come before me, what am I going to do? And I thought, well, I'm going to do what I've been doing. I'm going to really put that voice out there and really do some shredding. And Peter was up for it, man. I learned a lot from Peter. We changed a lot of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
The violins tuned differently than guitar, and so I had to work in different intervals a lot. And he would call me up and go, "Dude, this is we got to change this because it's just too weird to go from this to that." And and he was very gracious, and he really worked hard at that piece, and I thank him so much for that because he represented it so well, and his intonation on the high stuff is just
Yeah.
mind-blowing. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. That's so hard to
the
do.
the end of the third movement where he ascends and goes all the way to the top, and it's just like I was so thrilled with his performance on that.
Yeah. And such a deft and just feeling it. Just a beautiful touch. Yeah.
Yeah.
In many facets. I mean,
I wish you could have been at the premiere because he really he levitated the room with that. Yeah.
I
We
can
we were
imagine.
all in our seats and everybody was just levitating. It was really incredible.
Well, let's talk about the actual piece. And this has got an interesting premise. The subtitle is In the Language of Flowers, and the music kind of coalesces around this idea of the symbolism of flowers. And where did that come from?
I was thinking, I wanted to write about the relationship I was in, and it started with the third movement. The whole thing started with the third movement. I wrote the melody to the third movement in 2018, and I realized that this melody, as simple as it was way better than I was. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I am not good enough to write this melody. And I literally worked on the accompaniment to that melody for at least a year before I was able to frame it in something that sounded legit. Um, Several of the incarnations of that melody, they were just starting to sound like a TV theme, and it was just like, okay, I can't do this and I can't do this. And back to your point, at the beginning of the conversation, I went and took a lesson from Richard Danielpour, who's been kind of my long. I studied with Richard for a long time. Michael Keurig and Richard both for a long time, and I was in California, and I was like, Richard, I got to come over and bring this music over to you, and you got to help me with this. And he made some suggestions that were really profound, and so did Michael Keurig. It's funny, with this movement, they both made really great comments about it that helped me with a breakthrough. So back to that mentor thing. These guys are my good friends now, but I still consider them, I mean, they're both extremely accomplished composers. And Michael was like, what? He told me this timing thing with do this with the cellos and it happens in this other piece. And then I went and looked at this other piece. And then, do you know the music of Christopher Rouse?
Not deeply.
Right. So Chris was a professor, Pulitzer Prize winning composer who taught at Juilliard, and so cool. His music's so cool. And I became friends with him. I never studied with him, but I became friends. He was a rock fan. And I was, because oftentimes I'll study scores to just pull ideas, and I looked at his score and there it was right there. The two things that Richard Danielpour said and Michael Keurig were right there in Chris's score, you
Wow.
know? And so I was like, oh my God, that's it. And I tried it and it was like, oh my God, that's it. And so then I was able to finish the piece, and it was very gratifying because I was so afraid of that melody.
It's almost like in the pop song where you come up with just a beautiful, perfect hook, but you can't get the verses to come even close to
Exactly.
the quality of the hook, but in a much more complex way. Yeah.
Totally. And when I was a kid, I studied some composition when I was a kid. I studied with this cat named Edgar Grana in New York when I was like 22, but it wasn't real. We didn't dig in deep. But one thing he did, he gave me an assignment to analyze Elgar's Enigma variations. And that was the greatest thing that ever happened to me in terms of at that age, to dig into that piece and understand what Elgar does in that piece. Because he takes a little cell fragment of this melody, and it's a theme and variations for anybody who's listening that doesn't know the piece. And the way he takes that theme and variations and changes it with every movement is so phenomenal. It is the textbook theme and variations in my mind, and it's influenced my writing ever since. You know, ever since I refer back to that nonstop.
And how he captures the spirit of his friends that he's writing about, or that he's composing a movement about.
Yeah,
It's one of those pieces you can delve in forever, but I've never done it at the compositional level. That's
yeah, it's incredible.
so back to the violin concerto and the flowers. So you talked about that third movement, which is ambrosia,
Yeah. So
love.
sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that one's love, and that was the first one that came to you for this violin concerto, right?
It is, but I didn't know what the piece was. I didn't know that when I wrote it. I just wrote this melody that I thought, oh my God, this could be great. And as the piece developed, I was wanting to musically talk about how it feels to be excited in a relationship and fall in love, and the meaning of all of this. And in Nashville, where I did most of the writing for this piece, every morning I go to get a coffee and go. There's a little park in right near my apartment, and in the center of it, they have this bed of flowers in the spring and fall, anyway.
Ah,
And and that's where I got the idea. I was just looking at the flowers, thinking, well, I wonder what they're thinking. I wonder what the life of the flowers is saying. And it was just like an epiphany. And then I started digging into understanding that, the floriographical language of these things. And I wanted each movement to have a ithia on the end of it. So I was like, and I was lucky because I found forsythia, which is a new start, a new beginning, like excitement, and viscaria, which literally means will you dance with me? And so I started putting together, okay, these are the phases of this relationship, and ambrosia is the deep devotion and love, and wisteria has spirituality and longevity and love and romance. And that's how it all developed. And I think I brought it home, okay. It was a very difficult piece to write, especially the fourth movement, to really, put a button on it. I had these three movements, and then how am I going to finish this? And actually, I had the notes to the fourth movement before the first movement was written, and that was another great comment from Richard Daniel, where he's like, "You need another movement on here, man. You got to put something on the beginning," which is funny because the first movement of the piece was the first thing I ever wrote, and I threw it out because I was like, okay, I don't know what to do with this. So I threw it out and moved on, and I started writing the second and then the third, and then I had some notes for the fourth. And then I thought, oh my God, when he said you need another one, I went back to the first thing I was writing, and it worked perfectly for a first movement. It was just, this is what I'm saying about that accidents, things like that just happen by accident, and they're always the best ideas. I could have sat down and go, okay, I need to write a first movement. Let's do this thing that it's got to be. And I was just looking through my notes thinking, well, what does that sound like? Because I don't know what I was thinking even when I wrote it. I had no preconceived notions of anything. It was just a musical idea. and then it just plugged in like a puzzle piece.
It does. I mean, if I think about forsythia, it's pretty much the first flowers we get here, or first major things we get here in Wisconsin for springtime, this big showy yellow, and it's always
Yeah,
exciting. But
yeah.
that movement starts with dissonance, and then there's this sense of anticipation and this sense of tension, I guess, and then it builds and builds and builds. It's just a really such a cool movement, and the violin, uh, yeah. It's the violin starting right from the get-go as
So I made a point to put a cadenza on the beginning of this, and oftentimes there'll be, they'll wait to do a cadenza, and rather than do like a big cadenza, I made a conscious decision to do smaller cadenzas throughout the piece. And in the first cadenza, I weaved all the themes from each movement into that first cadenza. The first thing he does is da 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 ba da. That's the first. Those are each theme. I'm going to do a post on this actually. Each theme from the four movements is in that very first
uh,
violin cadenza. Yeah.
did Peter help you write those cadenzas, or did you write them all?
I wrote all of that stuff. Peter was really instrumental in saying, "Well, this works. This is easy to finger. Let's move this over. Maybe we could." A lot of times, I would put in like a six-tuplet, and he'd like impossible. Let's take out a note, and we'd turn it into five notes or four notes, and it was always better. He never made one suggestion that was like, eh. It was like, okay, yeah, that's cool. Great suggestions.
A lot of composers work with their soloists, over the centuries to to make it just right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard horror stories of some composers that just won't let you change anything, and like, I don't believe in that theory at all. And that's probably because I came from a rock band where I know that somebody else of equal talent could make a suggestion that you would never ever think of, and it's going to be good. That's what happens in rock and pop music. If you're truly collaborating, and you're not trying to hoard the ownership of the music. This is in rock. It's like somebody else's experiences can really enhance the music that you're trying to bring forth. And so when it came to collaborating with Peter, I was just like, great, let's do it. I mean, everything he said, I was like, cool, this is great. I mean, maybe I pushed back here on something small, but for the most part, his suggestions were incredible.
The movements in a way are a little bit like text painting of the old concept of expressing the words, but you're expressing this concept of the symbolism of the flower, and that second movement is so flirty and seductive, and the violin has this really, I mean, just the sound is phenomenal.
I
Yeah.
was so happy with that. I was really happy with that. I was a little bit worried that the ostinato would get kind of boring. And every time I tried to change it up and try to, mix up the rhythm to make it trickier, it was just like it just sounded forced.
Yeah.
So I just let it go and thinking, okay, this is like a tango, but not,
Yeah.
and 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 he played it so perfectly. He'd call me up and he'd be, check this out, and he'd play me a little section, and I was just thinking, oh, that's exactly what I want. I was hearing Piazzolla.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was hearing as that kind of Argentinian vibe, but in my way, and it was
Stylized
very,
kind of tango. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not really a tango, but it has that feel to it.
It does. Yeah, neat. And then we talked about that third movement, which is just so full of meaning. It's really, you imbued that somehow with this deep sense of the symbolism of what you're getting at, the
Yeah.
devotion and love. And yeah, it was,
Well, I will say that there's no music that I've ever written that brings my soul forth as much as that third movement.
yeah,
That one takes the cake for me in terms of really you know, putting forth my whole soul into that. That was and achieving what I was going for. I'm really happy with the outcome of that. So, and it was a magical experience, like the another accident at the end in that ascending thing that I referred to earlier. It was a complete accident. I literally was listening to the accompaniment and I sat at the keyboard and played the notes. And the notes you hear on that are the notes that I played. And it was just, I just
Wow.
sat like this. It was like somebody was holding my arm going like this. And
Yeah, just
so I
such
was,
a gorgeous finish.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. With the
And
greatest intonation known to man.
yeah,
Like, unbelievable.
I was not familiar with Peter Otto. I had to go look him up and look at his bio and go, wow, how have I
Yeah.
not heard of this
Yeah.
artist? He's
Well,
phenomenal.
I've been saying, like, Peter, why aren't you a touring soloist? He gives me a list of reasons, but he could easily be one of those guys, you know.
Yeah, he could.
And the fourth movement, I actually dreamt the rhythm. I had a dream about this da 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 dum dum da 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 dum, and I was thinking, what is that, And it kept haunting me and haunting me and haunting me, and I said, okay, I got to write this. What's it going to be? What am I doing here? And that all started from some music that I heard in a dream.
Lots of action in that movement. It's just
Yeah.
there's a lot happening. Yeah. And I'm wondering if is there an underlying emotional meaning to what you hear?
Love. I mean, when it comes down into the slower sections, that movement more than any, I was really trying to find this harmonic language in the slow parts that I'm always trying to find. And I was somewhat successful with that. There's some things I might change looking back at it, but um, I'm when you listen to it, this is a question for you. Like when you listen to it, did you feel like there was too much solo violin in that last movement? Because I was on the edge, like, okay, I like these solos, but I wonder what it'd be like if I just went straight to the other part. The short cadenzas are connecting it all, and there is another life of that piece where they don't do that. So I struggled with that when I finished it, and I ultimately decided that because Peter is who he is and how he could really, portray the piece, I left them all in there, and ultimately I'm glad I did. But there was like this parallel universe of I don't know if that was something that you might have heard when you listened to it.
No, it was powerful. It was a powerful movement for me. That it was just seemed to be it had a lot of emotional power. And I think the violin solos were certainly part of that. And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But it
There's
just it
some there's a couple lines in there that are some of my favorite lines in the whole piece. I can't sing it, but it's in there. There's a couple things that and the way he played them that I couldn't have asked for a better performance. And by the way, I should not go without mentioning the producer's name, Tim Handley, who, when I got to work with him, when I heard that he was going to be the producer, I was so excited because I love his records, and he's done a lot with Nashville Symphony, and of course he's won a lot of Grammys and stuff. But English guy has been doing it forever, and I just love the way he made this sound.
I guess for the fourth movement, I was thinking about the flower is wisteria, and one of the characteristics or part of the symbolism is resilience. And was there something that needed to be overcome? Is there something you had to be resilient about, I guess? I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
I like it. Maybe I'll adopt that. I wasn't thinking that, but that's good. That's really good. I was thinking the depth and longevity of and devotion of how relationships can be very like your own. I mean,
Yep.
like I said to you and Roy, you know.
A mature relationship.
Yeah, yeah, and just how certainty,
Yeah.
and the certainty, and you know that's interesting now because the certainty in how I felt like I was writing it is definitely there, and that movement out of all of them, I was the most on top of. You know, I was able to write that movement better than I was able to write the other ones because I was more on top of it and I had heard it very clearly, you know. So that kind of plays into that whole stability and devotion
Yep. The
element.
trust. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Trust. That's a good word for that. At the end of the piece, I made a conscious effort to give it a big ending because the original ending was that it just fizzles out. It goes where he plays button da dun da dun da dun da dun da dun da dun bum 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 bum, and that was it. And I lived with that ending for a very long time. And every time I listened to it, I was imagining sitting in the concert hall, and I realized that nobody would know it's over. I was thinking, oh my God, I got to put an ending on this. And I'm not one to do those big endings like the one that you hear in there. I mean, I had to go look at like 5 scores to look at what people, how they do that, you know.
Yeah, that's
And
a
I,
powerful
and I
ending.
thank you. But I wrote a couple endings and I sent one to Peter. And first he's like, I'm a little underwhelmed by that. And I said,
Ouch.
okay, yeah, it was, you know, I love the constructive criticism though. You know, it hurts a little bit, but it's like, okay, I got to get it so he loves it, you know. And I go back and he's like, oh, that's a little better. And I go back and I finally did, and then it finally dawned on me. Wait a minute, you have to repeat the theme, you know. Button da 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 da, and it's like, yes, okay, we got it. And the crowd goes wild. It's funny.
And I bet the crowd did go wild at the premiere.
They did. It was a magical moment. I was very pleased with that, but mostly because it took me so long to write these, you know, especially the violin concerto, because I started the violin concerto before the symphony. I started the violin concerto back when I wrote that first melody, and then I was telling them, "Hey man, when do you guys want the violin concerto to be ready?" And they're like, "No, no, no, we want you to write the symphony first."
Huh.
And so I had to stop and switch gears and do this whole other thing in the middle. So in between starting the violin concerto and finishing the violin concerto, I wrote Symphony of Returning Light and the last Winger album. Yeah,
Holy cow.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. And in between, I would, you know, lay out some notes for the violin concerto as much as I could, but that was, you know, the whole piece was, you know, started in 18 and finished in, I don't know, 25 or whatever.
Boy, so trying to keep the continuity with all of those other projects going, that must have been
Yeah,
kind of challenging. I can see
yeah,
why you had to kind of go back and use, you jettisoned that first movement and then came back to it and
exactly, exactly. Those
mm.
are some nice flowers you have behind you, and that painting is really nice too.
Thank you. That painting belonged to a dear friend of mine who is in her 90s, just passed away last year, and the family knew I loved that painting and they gave it to me as a
Oh,
gift.
that's nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
And another friend brought those tulips yesterday. So, yeah, it's all
That's
good.
great. Great
Ha
colors.
happened to match. Yeah. Lucky.
Well, you know, it's great for me to talk to somebody like yourself who has so well listened in this uh, genre because I don't, you know, I come from the rock world, so a lot of the people that listen to my music and they comment on my music came from the rock world. I don't actually have a lot of experience talking to people that come from where you're coming from. So to hear your comments is great because you actually kind of know what you're listening to, And so that's like uh, that's that's a revelation for me. I was like, wow, she really understood what I was doing right there. That's amazing.
Little
I have
by
to call you
little.
more often.
I'm just a lifelong learner, like, like yourself and like so many
Yeah.
others who just you acquire it little by little. But I'll recommend one album for you that just came out, I think maybe in the last month or so, and that is the violinist Midori just released an album of Schumann, Clara Schumann and Robert Schumann, and she's done the Schumann Violin Concerto, which did not get published when he was alive. He was deeply, deeply emotional. I mean, he really connected to his emotional self, and he was into literature and all of that kind of stuff. And but he frankly got syphilis and started to go slightly insane, and his physical and mental health declined. And he wrote his violin concerto, his only violin concerto, sort of as that was just happening, as he was just starting to decline, kind of.
Wow.
And his wife, Clara, and the guy he wrote it for, Joseph Joachim, decided that they would withhold it from the public because they didn't feel like it reflected his best work. And that was a disservice. And it didn't get published until
Wow.
the 1930s, 1937, I think. And it has since been starting to get more airplay, more time in the concert halls and stuff. But Midori's recording of this that just came out is really deeply reflective, and you can just feel what he's got going on, just the
Oh
emotions
wow.
of the
Oh,
piece. Yeah,
I wrote it down. I'll go check it out. Yeah. Which
yeah.
what's the name of it?
It's the it's his only violin concerto.
Oh, it
Like
is. Okay.
I think I don't remember what key it's in.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll
And
take
the
it.
violinist is Midori, Midori.
It's funny because I really enjoyed writing a violin concerto, and I'd actually like to do another one. Just because I feel like I think I could do it. I'm drawn to it. It was fun. It was very intimidating at first, but now I'm thinking, I could do one or two of those because there's a lot of things that I would like to try to do that I think that would be cool.
Oh, you this one is just so it's it's wonderful. It's such a great concerto, Kip. It's high quality. It deserves to be heard everywhere. And if
Thank
you
you.
undertook another concerto, I think it would be to the benefit of listeners everywhere.
And listen, I would love to get some other violinists on it, and I mean, I'm gonna do my best to get it out there. Just because I think, I think it's fun to play. I mean, Peter was really enjoying playing it. It sits well in your hand. And a lot of modern composers, they don't. Some of the I don't know what to say there. I mean, that's difficult. Some of them are really hard and they don't sit right on the violin. So I heard a lot of comments about how mine sits pretty well in the hand, and just that would be exciting for me to hear other people play it.
Oh, wouldn't that be neat if it was taken up by others? That it should be. It deserves to be. Yeah.
That'd be great.
And the viola is another one that never has enough repertory and has such a beautiful, deep, rich sound.
I mean, come on, it's incredible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I should probably wrap this up and let you go. It's getting late where you are.
I'm good, but thank you very much for having me. I mean, when I got your email, I was just so thrilled by it. I really appreciate that.
Well, Kip Winger, thank you very much for joining me to talk about the symphony, your first symphony. We're going to call it the Symphony Number One, or you could prefer the Symphony Return of the Light.
Yeah, Symphony of the Returning
Turning
Light.
Light.
It was called Symphony Number One, and I changed the title because I felt like that title reflected the content of the piece better. And so, yeah, Symphony of the Returning Light and the Violin Concerto. And I couldn't be more happy with the way it came out. For me personally, to have such a high level of musicianship, and the conductor, Giancarlo, who I owe so much to, was just absolutely amazing.
It's a recording on the Naxos label, which is one of those terrific labels for classical music. And the Nashville Symphony Orchestra, Giancarlo Guerrero conducting. Peter Otto is the violinist. It's just a stellar recording all the way around. It's available now, just out on all of the usual platforms and at kipwinger.com.
That's right. Well, thank you very much. Great to see you again.
Thanks so much for your time, Kip. Really appreciate it.